Hello and welcome to the Flipside. I am your host, Dr. Michael Nichols. Welcome to another episode. The journey continues. Today, we've got I have a lineup for you regarding vaccines once again. Today, we're going to talk about point number 4 in my book. So my book is titled Vaccines Point by Point. So each chapter is a particular point, and point number 4 is titled Trust for a Liability-Free Product. And to me, this is one of well, they're all important, but this is a really important point that needs to be driven home to people who don't quite understand this particular topic. When we're talking about vaccines, and I'm going to talk about the COVID vaccine in this a little bit. We touched upon it in the last episode, but we're going to talk a little bit about that here. The liability situation around the COVID vaccine is different than the rest of the vaccine program, but at the same time, it's very similar. It's very close to the way the rest of it is set up. So before I dive into that, before we start really talking about vaccine liability, I want to ask you a couple of serious questions. And I want you to truly think about your answer before you just give the answer. So really think about it. So here's the first one. So if you were going to purchase a vehicle for your young teen who was just about to start driving or was beginning to drive, which vehicle would you be more likely to purchase? Okay. Vehicle number 1 is manufactured by a company that is fully liable for any and all manufacturing defects that may occur to said vehicle during the manufacturing process. Vehicle number 2 is manufactured by a company who has been given a pass for all liability, meaning that this second company has zero responsibility for any injuries or deaths that may occur to your teenager while driving the vehicle that they've created. Which vehicle do you think you're going to purchase for your teen? Seems like a no-brainer, but you have to decide that. Next question, though. Let's say you need to purchase a medication to help your child be able to live with a particular condition. Medication number 1 is created by a pharmaceutical company that is held liable for any problems that may occur to your child from taking this product. Medication number 2 is created by a pharmaceutical company that has been given a complete pass for any and all liability from any and all injuries or death that may occur to your child while taking their product. Which medication do you think you're going to choose? Now, I'm assuming that it probably didn't take you very long to answer that question. I would think it'd be fairly quick. Most likely, these were easy choices for you. And I would assume, and you know what they say about assuming, but I would assume that everybody who just heard those questions picked the car and the medicine that were created by companies that had some type of liability hanging over their head to ensure that these companies are going to do the steps necessary to create a safe product, right? And especially when you're thinking about your child or your young child or your teen, your brain automatically, automatically goes to, what can I do to ensure my child's safety? You know, and one of those things is, buying safe products for your child. And in the process of investigating safe products, you're going to look for companies that have a good track record, for one, and you're going to look for some type of liability for what they do, right? And we tend to do that for everything, for the most part. Everything has some type of liability over the manufacturer to say that you need to hold yourself to a high standard and create a product that is safe, because otherwise you can get sued for the damages that are created by your faulty product, right? And it seems like just a no-brainer. It seems like this really simple thing to think about. And I think when we keep vaccines out of the conversation, if the sentence talks about a car, or even if it talks about a medicine, but not vaccines, 99.9 to 100% of people are going to say, yes, liability is a good thing. Liability helps ensure a safe product. And as you're going to find out as we go through this today, liability doesn't ensure that. But at least it's a measure that can be used to motivate manufacturers to create a safer product. It helps create at least one type of safeguard, correct? Otherwise, you're removing all safeguards, you're removing all responsibility, and you're saying, just do whatever you want to do. You know, maybe you're saying, we trust you implicitly. We trust the pharmaceutical company implicitly that they are only going to do what's best for my child, that they have no other intent except to create a product that's going to be the best product ever for my child. And I trust them implicitly. Do you entrust pharmaceutical companies implicitly? I sure as hell don't. I don't know if I trust any company implicitly. I want safeguards. I want liability over that pharmaceutical company or that manufacturer companies over their head, so that they know that they have to work extra hard to cover their ass, right? CYA, cover your ass. And it helps create that. So this is what we're talking about in this episode. We're talking about liability. We're talking about the need for liability. And we're talking about this liability being removed and the big question mark around that. It has been brought up now with MAHA. In fact, we can just sweep that under the rug, and instead of even saying MAHA, let's just say Secretary Kennedy now. There's a lot of people in that MAHA movement that want the liability put back onto vaccine manufacturers. In other words, they want the 1986 Vaccine Protection Act repealed so that the vaccine manufacturers will have liability for their product. Now, I agree with this. 100% I agree with this. I don't think it should have ever been taken away in the first place. However, just to touch upon this one point while we're on it, for all of you out there who may be watching this who are upset that that's not something that hasn't been done already. There's far too many people on social media, and I know this is the whole point of social media, is to complain and make noise. But there's far too many people who are complaining that RFK Jr. is not doing the job he promised he would do going into the office. Let's put this into perspectives, folks. It is March 22nd, 2025. He's been effectively in office for less than 2 months. He has 4 years in this position, longer if someone decides to keep him on. Doubt that'll happen, but possibly. If JD Vance becomes president, then I'm sure he'll keep him on. But the point being is that he's been in his position now for less than 2 months in a period of at least 4 years, and people are slandering his integrity, saying that he's not living up to his words. And folks, take a chill pill, have a little bit of patience. This is the beginning of the process, the very beginning of the process. And he is dealing in a delicate situation with some delicately minded individuals who are so hung up on the way things have been done and on vaccines are safe. They're so hung up on this. He has to ease his way through this minefield if he wants to actually get things done. If he were to try to walk in on day one and say, boom, 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 this is what we're doing, he would run through so many roadblocks, probably nothing would get done. I applaud him for the way he's doing it right now, and I have total faith that he is working towards the steps necessary to make the vaccine program, A, safe, and B, if it can't be made safe, eliminating it. And that is an option, folks. If it can't be made safe, it should be eliminated. So if the science really shows that it's safe, the science is going to continue showing that. Because, of course, according to all those people who said that, the science was settled, right? But we'll see. We'll find out. But let's talk about the vaccine program as a whole. Many people who are just coming into this conversation are coming into it because of the COVID vaccine. It was the COVID vaccine's experimental nature with mRNA being forced upon them, these mandates that made a lot of people's minds open to the idea that, hey, well, if the government's going to do all this lying and forcing and coercing with this product that's totally experimental and I don't trust, maybe all these people that we're talking about vaccines aren't totally crazy. Maybe there's something to all this. Maybe I should listen to that. And so this is for you folks whose minds have been open to this possibility that the entire vaccine program needs to at least be looked at. And it's for all those who have been looking at it. And so let's get into that. Let's get into trust for a liability-free product. So I don't know, like I said, how many people are aware of the background for this particular topic, but in 1986, in response to a deluge of lawsuits, primarily revolving around the DTP vaccine, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine, the vaccine manufacturers came to Congress and said, we can't do this. We can't do this. We are getting sued left and right, and it's costing us too much money. And so if you don't do something to protect us, we're going to stop making vaccines because it's just not profitable for us. And with that threat hanging over the heads of Congress, they decided to create the National Vaccine Injury Act, NVIA, and this was created in 1986. And this program really did a number on the future of vaccines, because what it did is it gave the vaccine manufacturers a blanket liability over wrongdoing with their vaccines, that even when done properly, vaccines can still cause injury. It doesn't matter. The vaccine companies had carte blanche. No more lawsuits could be thrown at them. Instead, what it did is it shifted the responsibility, the liability, onto the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which is essentially a government-led program, meaning that it was going to be the government picking up the tab for injuries from vaccines, and the vaccine manufacturers would be held non-liable for these problems. And that was what happened. And you know, it is a story that, I'm going to move my camera down here a little bit. There we go. It is a story that is still showing repercussions to this day in a really big way. Now, one of the repercussions from this act in 1986 is that prior to 1986, and I might be off by one or two here, but I'm going to be awfully close. We only had maybe 4 or 5 vaccines that were on the schedule. And I don't remember. Once again, this is something I should have prepared better for this part of it. But the number of doses right now is something like 77 doses of, I can't remember the number of vaccines. I'm forgetting it off the top of my head. But suffice it to say that the number that we had in 86 has more than quadrupled since 1986. So from 1963-ish or earlier, actually, since the early 50s to the 80s, we had about 4 vaccines. Now, 2 of those were combination vaccines. There was the MMR and the DTP. They were combination vaccines, but we had basically 4 vaccines. After 1986, like I said, that number quadrupled. So one of the things that Vaccine Act did is it opened up the doorway to these pharmaceutical companies. They basically said, well, hey, fantastic. If we're not going to be held responsible for injuries, that means that we can just throw all of our money, all of our weight into manufacturing more vaccines to put onto the schedule because, hey, we're not going to be held responsible for these. We're not going to be held responsible for any of the issues with this. So it gives us a liability-free product. Can you imagine that? A liability-free product. It's unfathomable to me that that's even something that someone would think is a good thing to do. But they handed that to the pharmaceutical companies and said, here, liability-free product. And so then they started producing more and more and more vaccines at a fairly accelerated rate. So that's one of the big things that opened up that. Now, I've talked about this a little bit, bits and pieces, and I'm not going to talk about it in a big way here. It's not the topic. But one of the big points to bring up regarding vaccine safety, individual vaccines, none of them have ever been properly tested. And when I mean properly tested, meaning they've been through the gold standard, which is a placebo-controlled double-blind type study. None of them have done that because the placebos in the vast majority of these cases were usually other vaccines. So they got a measles vaccine and they tested against a different measles vaccine or DTP or some other type of vaccine. You can't have a controlled study with 2 toxic products. Saline, solution, and vaccine. That you can do, but you can't do, we'll take out the viral components of the vaccine and give this person all of the components of the vaccine except for the viral components, and we'll give this group the entire vaccine. That's the type of thing you see happening with these types of research studies with these vaccines. And then they say it was properly studied. Well, it's not. That's not a proper study, and it doesn't show safety or efficacy the way that it's supposed to. But the other big thing is this. Even if you were to conclude that this safety test done for this particular vaccine was done correctly, the one thing that has never been done is a safety study on all of the vaccines that they put into a child's body at the same time. So a child is injected with numerous vaccines in one visit, and numerous vaccines over very brief amounts of time, 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, a plethora of vaccines injected into this child, into this baby. And that study has never been done. They've never, ever looked at the accumulation of toxins from multiple injections. And that creates, once again, another huge question mark because it's never been touched. And so, like I said, this is liability-free product. A liability-free product that has not been properly tested ever. All right. I think I drove that point into the grave. I want to show you a few things here. Let's talk about vaccines. I want to show you this right here. Let's talk about the money from vaccines. This article, this website that I'm showing with you right here, this is from Markets and Markets, a website. And in this, they are estimating that the vaccine market worth by 2029 will be $94.9 billion. $94.9 billion by 2029. So I want you to think about that number. If you can even wrap your head around $94.9 billion, that's a crazy number. That is how much the vaccine market will be worth in 2029. Crazy, crazy, crazy numbers. Down below here, it says, similarly, the vaccine market, excluding the COVID vaccines, okay, so we're not even including the COVID vaccine, this is projected to reach 80.3 billion. Oh, never mind. I wanted to point out this number here, 53 billion in 2024. So last year it was 53 billion. By 2029, they're talking 94.9 billion. 94.9 billion. Now, when you think about that much money, how much motivation do you think manufacturers have to change this process to, how happy do you think they would be to lose the protection from liability, right? How much influence do you think they have in our government? How much influence do you think they have in our media? $94.9 billion. There's an old expression, money talks, bullshit walks. Well, sometimes money talks and it speaks bullshit. And that's what we got right now. We have a situation where manufacturers of these vaccines are making money hand over fist, and they're making it in a liability-free market, which allows them to just continue putting out more and more new products with little to no concern over the consequences. So that might bring up a point in your mind and say, yeah, okay, I hear your point, Dr. Nichols, but come on, are you really saying that these companies don't care at all about what happens to people or to kids, that they're doing this as some kind of evil plot, or you can't, these companies do so much good? All right, so let's be real clear. I'm not calling it evil. I might on the side, but that's not what I'm doing it here. I'm not implying an evil intent. I'll let you figure that out. But to assume that these companies have these hearts of gold, and that the reason they're in all this is because they want everybody to be healthy and happy and live long lives, and they want children to be protected, and that's their motivations. That might be, on their company website, but the bottom line is the mighty dollar. The bottom line is profit. That is the bottom line. And make no mistakes that that's what it's about. Now, the evidence is clear as far as intent, because the companies that we're talking about, these vaccine manufacturing companies, every single one of them have been through lawsuits. Now, understand, these are lawsuits on products that they actually have liability for. And in most of these lawsuits, we're talking about lawsuits where they actually have shown that these companies lied, just out lied. Okay. Now, even without talking about the vaccine manufacturing companies, think about the tobacco industry. The tobacco industry was putting out a highly addictive, carcinogenic, toxic product, still are, for decades and decades, and they knew it. And when the shit hit the fan, it was discovered in their own research, their own literature, their own company transcripts, that they knew about it the whole time. They knew the stuff was addictive. They knew that the stuff they were adding to it was making it more addictive. They knew all this stuff, and they did it anyway. And our government said, bad boy, charged them a couple of million or $1 billion, and then let them continue creating their toxic product for whatever reason. So we still have cigarettes on the market. Excuse me. But that's one example of a corporation telling you one thing and understanding and knowing another in clear view. In fact, if you go back to the cigarette commercials from early, decades and decades ago, they actually had actors dressed up as doctors smoking a cigarette and saying, "This is the one I recommend to my patients," right? They even went as far as saying, this brand of cigarettes helps lung health. I mean, come on, really? This is what they were saying. And their own records show that they knew information about cancer and respiratory problems and addictive nature of nicotine long, long, long before they were called out on it. You could say this about a lot of companies. 3M, okay, the 3M company. There was the movie. I can't remember the name of the movie, and I don't remember the actor's name. Oh no! But there was this great movie that was made to talk about the case with 3M, how it was shown that they were dumping all of these toxins into the Ohio River and into these other areas, and it was killing people and animals for all these miles around this stuff. They knew it. They knew these products had cancer causing toxic properties to them. They knew it, and they knew that they were dumping it, and they knew that it was killing people, and they were paying people off not to go public with it, and they just kept it up and kept it up and kept it up. Think about Purdue Pharma and OxyContin. Okay, they knew that. They knew that it was addictive. They knew that it was killing people, and they continued doing it. And of course, they got a little tap on the hand and said, "Don't do that." Okay, and they stopped. Those companies and the vaccine manufacturers, absolutely no difference whatsoever. Now, I'm going to pull this up. I think I'll pull up the whole thing here. Now, I'm pulling up. You're getting to see once again a sneak peek at one of the chapters of my book here. And in this part of the book, I go through lawsuits, and I go through a lot of the lawsuits because I really want to show the reader what I'm talking about here. So I'm just going to briefly give a synopsis of some of these bullet points. But for this one here, you'll see in bold Purdue Pharma. Okay. Pharmaceutical giant Purdue Pharma secretly pursued a plan dubbed Project Tango. This was the one with the opioids that we just talked about. Okay. And so that's one there. Here's one with Merck, vaccine manufacturer, right? Pay a criminal fine in the amount of $321 million in connection with its guilty plea based on its painkiller Vioxx. Now remember, Vioxx was an FDA-approved medical product with full liability, okay? Full liability. And they still had to remove it from the market, and they had to pay. That's because they had liability, okay? It's because they had liability. Next one, Merck made a hit list of doctors who criticized Vioxx. Does that sound familiar? I mean, think about it. The drug companies and the media have been in bed together for who knows how long. They've been partners in crime. And especially during COVID, it was really glaring that if you said anything against COVID, anything against the vaccines, you were smacked down. So many doctors actually lost their license for talking about hydroxychloroquine or any of the other alternative type treatments. If they weren't pushing the vaccines, they could lose their license. This was happening prior to COVID, but most people weren't aware of it because it had to do with the anti-vaxxers and people weren't paying attention to it. Once COVID came along, people started paying attention to it. But this is talking about them making a hit list to neutralize and discredit these doctors. Let's see, Bayer and Johnson & Johnson jointly resolved approximately 25,000 claims filed against their product. How do you pronounce that? Xarelto. I guess these names are so weird because it was creating blood clots. Let's go down a little bit further here. Eli Lilly, another pharmaceutical giant, paid $515 million in criminal fines and up to $800 million as civil settlements to resolve something on its antipsychotic drug, Zyprexa. And once again, these are liability products, right? These are liability products, and they're still having to do all this stuff. And they're paying this because their products were killing people or harming people. They're paying these because they're caught in these lies. Okay, Johnson & Johnson to pay $70 million to settle cases brought by the SEC and criminal authorities because Johnson & Johnson chose profit margins over compliance with the law by acquiring a private company for the purposes of paying bribes. Do you see that? $70 million for paying bribes. GlaxoSmithKline, right there, biggest healthcare lawsuit in history, with $3 billion in payment. The company pleaded guilty to 3 counts and found guilty of unlawfully promoting certain prescription drugs. It failed to report certain safety data. I mean, look at this. I'm not making this stuff up. The same companies that create your vaccines with zero liability have been shown to be criminals in court, to do things like hide data, to do things like pay bribes, okay, to change research. Okay. AstraZeneca, another vaccine manufacturer, was marketing the drug Seroquel for additional uses, even though the FDA had not approved this drug for those uses. In addition, AstraZeneca paid kickbacks to doctors for authorizing articles about the drug. The company was paying doctors to write articles in favor of the drugs. The same thing Purdue Pharma did with the opioids. They paid off researchers to write research articles in favor of what they wanted. They paid off members of the FDA to look the other way, and they did it over and over again. This list goes on and on. As you can see, these are ongoing lawsuits I put here, and it just goes on. And so this is all information from my book, like I said, going over all those lawsuits. When you see those lawsuits for these companies, and like I said, the vast majority of that is over products they have liability for. Now fathom these same criminals, because that's what they are, these same criminals producing products with zero liability for your children. Let that sink in. You're allowing known criminals, liars, cheaters to create products that are supposed to be for your child's health, and yet they have no liability on the consequences of those products. That's pretty mind-boggling, if you ask me. Pretty mind-boggling. Now, along the same lines, I want to show you something else here. We were just talking about the lying. We were just talking about the paying people off, etc. Now, I have a whole chapter on conflicts of interest in my book, but I wanted to show you this one website here. This is from a website called Drug Watch, and I'm not going to read the whole article here for you, but as you can see from the headline, Big Pharma's role in clinical trials. Data from clinical trials are important in approving new medicines and discovering new treatments. But Big Pharma funds and runs most clinical trials. According to critics, this could allow drug companies to fake study results or hide dangerous side effects to get their drugs approved or increase sales. Once again, this is who we are trusting with liability-free product. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. Now, in my chapter on conflicts of interest, I go into the conflicts of interest with the journals, with the medical journals. There have been innumerous articles written on the corruption behind research articles. Now, let me back up and say this. I've mentioned this before. I'm a huge fan of research. I think research is valuable. If it's done properly, it can prove and help so many things that help out society, help out mankind. But you have to also understand the nature of the beast. The nature of research is that it can be corrupted pretty easily, actually, okay? There's all sorts of bias that can be introduced, and bias is the least of the problems. There's outright corruption, okay, where the people who are writing the articles are being paid to find a particular result, or they're being paid to find a particular result, and as such, they hide results that would disprove the product and emphasize the points that would prove it. This happens all the time. If you're seeing a research paper that proves how well a particular product works, you've got a bunch of different things that could be happening here. Number one, hey, could be a great research study, and yes, it proves that it works and we're good, okay? One of the things you want to look at is who's paying for the research. Who are the people working for and who's funding the research? Because that is really where, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. And oftentimes what you get are people from hospitals that are being funded by particular drug companies. And the drug company says, we want to see this particular result. So they gear the research and design it so they can see exactly what that is. Now, this can happen on all sides. So I'm sure there will be people go, yes, and that's what happens with you anti-vaxxers. You've got research that was manufactured to prove your points. I'm not going to say that that hasn't happened. It very possibly could happen. But I will tell you that if you're going to admit that, then you have to admit that there's a possibility that a lot of the research that you're holding up as pro-vaccine that is supporting what you're saying, then you have to realize that a lot of that is flawed, sometimes critically flawed. So that is out there, and we know it's out there. And we have to factor all this in when we're thinking about giving these vaccine companies this carte blanche, zero liability for products that go into our children. God, my brain just always says, common sense, people, common sense, right? As you get older, you realize that common sense ain't so common as they say. It's not always that case. All right, next point here. I wanted to show with the 1986 Vaccine Protection Act. Okay, like I said, this was 1986. It was trying to create a situation. Let's go back to that just a second. So from the mid 70s up through 1986, the vaccine manufacturers were getting slammed with lawsuits from injuries from the DTP vaccine, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis vaccine. Lots of different situations, seizures, grotesque swelling of the arm that had the vaccine in it, hives and other types of things like that, and brain injuries. And so these, a lot of people were bringing lawsuits up against the manufacturers. Now, of course, the manufacturers saying, oh, none of this has to do with our product. Our product's perfectly safe. It's not causing these problems. But as the lawsuits went, they lost. They were losing enough lawsuits to where it was becoming a concern that this was going to affect them financially. The inherent fear in these diseases and the inherent trust in the vaccines led Congress to pass that act and give them that carte blanche liability. And like I said, that also created the National Vaccine Compensation Program, which was to take over liability from the manufacturers and put it into the hands of the government. Now, as anybody who's ever had to do anything where they've had to deal with the government and trying to get something done, the volume of paperwork, the volume of runaround, the volume of complete BS to get something done through a government agency is enough to drive you to suicide. It's crazy. And so, yeah, that was a great idea. Let's put the responsibility into a governmental agency and have them be the ones to determine what happens with this. Good luck with that. Good luck with that. So let me pull up something here. All right, where are we here? Oh, that's right, we're over here. All right, here we go. So what I'm pulling up here to show you. So this is from Health Resources and Services Administration from the government, a data and statistics paper talking about the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. And what I wanted to show you was that little highlighted piece right there. To date, okay, total compensation paid over the life of the program is approximately $5.3 billion. $5.3 billion. Now this, I want to make sure I'm looking at things properly here. This was updated in 2025. So this is the latest of that. And you can actually see the number there at the end of the page there in bold, $5.3 million. So to date, the National Vaccine Compensation Program has paid out over $5 billion in claims for injuries from vaccines. Now, the proponents of vaccines will say to that number, when you compare that number to the amount of doses and the amount of people that have been given vaccines over the life of that program since this started, these statistics started, it makes that number inconsequential. I'll tell you a couple of things about that. Number one, no injury or death is inconsequential. It's the same argument that these same exact people would say about COVID. And if you belittled the COVID statistics, every death counts. I get that. Okay. So number one, let's not put down the amount of deaths, the amount of injury, permanent lifetime injury that have occurred through vaccines. The first thing is this: when you tell me that vaccines are safe and effective, okay, I can argue both of those. When you say safe, and I tell you that you've paid out over $5 billion in injury claims and death compensation claims since the inception of the this is just since 1988 when they started keeping track of this, okay? Not even 1986, 1988. And so vaccines have been around even longer than that. You can imagine that it would have been more than that, okay? $5 billion since 1988. Now, let's talk about that number, okay? Because, and I'm going to switch paper here. This is from 2007. You'll see that this was performed by Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Incorporated, which is a branch, may not be the proper terminology, so I apologize if it's not the proper terminology, but it's part of Harvard Medical School. This is an insurance branch, et cetera, that has ties with Harvard Medical. And they did an investigative look, and they were looking, their purpose was this research project was funded to improve the quality of vaccination programs by improving the quality of physician adverse vaccine event detection and reporting to the National Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. So they were trying to see what they could do or what needed to be done to improve VAERS. VAERS is the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. What that means is this: VAERS is the system that you report to if you feel like you have a case to present to the government saying that vaccines caused my child's injury, my child's death, or me as an adult, it created my problem. You report this information to VAERS, and then it gets put into the system, and there's a whole process for courts. We'll look at that here in a minute. VAERS is notoriously a notoriously poor system. It was designed bad from the beginning. and it has never been updated or fixed since then. And the reports on VAERS deficiencies are numerous. Every so many years, there's a new report by Congress or a new study that's done that says how messed up the VAERS system is, but nothing is ever done to improve the reporting system. It continues to languish in obscurity and languish in its obsolescence because it is not a good program. And my suspicion, and I'm pointing out that this is my suspicion, there's no fact here, of course. My suspicion is that's done on purpose. That is done 100% on purpose. VAERS is not updated. It's not improved because they don't want it to work perfectly. If it worked perfectly, it would be able to then be held up here as, look at this, because VAERS is an excellent reporting system, and look at this. Now they have a weapon. They can look at VAERS and go, ignore VAERS. VAERS is not worth looking at. VAERS is as accurate as Wikipedia, for whatever that's worth. I mean, VAERS is not worth the paper it's written on. That's what they want, and that's what they get because they don't put any money, time, or effort into fixing it. They'll review it, they'll study it, they'll research it so they can, once again, show the public, we're looking into this. And yes, it sucks. So here's the things that we should probably do. And then nothing ever happens. And it hasn't happened since it was put into development in 1988. It stayed the exact same defunct system that it was when it was started. But here's the part about this program that I want to bring up, not the crappiness of VAERS. Let's come down here. Right here. In their results, they reported that adverse events from drugs and vaccines are common but underreported. Now, here is the kicker. They went on to say fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported. Fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported. Let that sink in. Let that set the alarms in your brain off. Start thinking about that. Less than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported. So I'm going to come back over here to the data from the government that tells us that total compensation paid over the life of this program so far is $5.3 billion. If that's correct, and if the other information is correct at 1%, then this number is only 1% of the possibility of compensation that could have occurred since 1988 to now. Imagine that. Multiply this now. Understand that this is 1% and now multiply it and get it up to where it needs to be. Is your tongue hanging out? Are your eyes goggling? Are you like, what the hell, right? Now let's go with an argument. The argument would be, well, that's, there's lots of errors that could occur in that study. 1% is probably not the likely. Fantastic. I'll give you, how about it? Let's say they made a big error and the number is really 10%. That's a huge error there, folks, from 1% to 10%. So let's say the true number should have been 10%. Still, look at that. That number there is only 10% of the actual number. Add the other 90% up to that and look at what we got now. This is some crazy numbers. Let's say we even went on the ledge here and said that number should have been 50% of cases instead of 1%. Okay, 50% are reported, 50% are not reported, as opposed to only 1% reported. Even at 50%, we're now over 10 billion. Some crazy, crazy numbers. So when we say 1% of that adverse events are reported, that should be very impactful to you. The number of people that are actually getting damaged from vaccines is astronomical. It's astronomical. So once again, the same people that like to rah, rah, rah for the vaccines and say that anti-vaxxers don't know what they're talking about, and look at how small the amount of people that get injured are compared to the number of people that are saved. Number one, you can't even calculate the number that are saved. It's a made up number because it's a fictional thing. There's no way to actually quantify that. But when we say, here's the number of people that have actually reported, and we've actually done studies that say only 1% are being reported, then we can multiply that pretty easily, and we can quantify that number and tell you that your comment about the amount of people being injured is here, the amount of people being saved is here, is bullshit. It's bullshit. And it's the data that shows that. It's not some crazy person making it up because we want to destroy the vaccine program. Get over yourself and realize that we have children that are being damaged every single year. And it's going to continue until we do something about this program. And understand, I'm not saying get rid of the program. Now, I might be saying get rid of the program as it stands, but that's different than saying get rid of the vaccine program. If you could make vaccines safe and effective, truly safe and effective, where the number of people getting damaged, injured, etc., killed goes down to such a negligible thing that it's not even existent anymore. If you could get it down to zero, preferably, hey, inject me with this stuff if it actually works and makes me healthy. But you can't prove that, and the proof against it is pretty damn damaging. So here's the problem we have. I could just, mic drop right there. I should be able to walk out of the building. Everything's good. But let's show a little bit more. I want to show you one more paper here. I'm going to increase the size of this here. So this is GAO. This is from Government Reform, Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. And this was written in 2014. I can tell you that the way these systems work, and once again, I'm not going to guarantee this, but the way these systems work, that if these were the numbers in 2014, I can only fathom how much worse it is now, because they've not spent one dime or lifted one finger to improve these programs. So what you're going to see here is from 2014. Extrapolate this and make it bigger because it's going to be. So I'm going to skip down. You'll see some highlights here in a minute. I don't remember. There's the first one, I think. So this is still talking about that vaccine injury compensation program. So in this, in general, to be eligible for compensation, a petition must be filed, 1, for a vaccine-related injury within 3 years of the first symptom of the injury or significant aggravation of an injury, or 2, for a death within 2 years of the death and within 4 years after the first symptom of the vaccine-related injury, or signification aggravation of an injury. That probably should say significant, from which the death resulted. Okay, so to be eligible for compensation, to be part of that $5 billion, you have to have filed something within 3 years of the injury or 2 years of the death of the injury for you to be eligible. Okay, now that seems, I guess, kind of reasonable, 3 years, 2 years, but let's understand something. For the vast majority of people out there, they are told constantly that vaccines do not cause problems. They are safe and effective. So when they have a reaction, let me reframe that. I'm a dad, I've got a child. My child has a reaction. The reaction didn't occur as soon as they put the shot in the arm. Let's say the reaction occurred 3 days later, okay? 4 days later, a week later, okay? And they have some kind of reaction. They have seizures. They're starting to regress into autism, okay? What do? I take my child and I run back to the pediatrician because that's who I trust. And I say, hey, doc, this is what's happening with my child. This is what's happening with my child. Could it have been the vaccine? What does the doctor do? Well, the pediatrician's a good pediatrician who follows the rules of the American Medical Association, who says that vaccines can't cause injury. So they look that person straight in the eye. They look me straight in the eye and they say, Mr. Nichols, it's not the vaccine. It can't be the vaccine. Let's try to figure out what it is. So now me, trusting my doctor, believes that it's not the vaccine. It couldn't have been the vaccine. And time goes by and my child's getting worse and I'm trying to find answers. And the doctors keep telling me that they don't know what it is, but it's certainly not the vaccines. And time goes by. Now it's 5 years later, and I finally start finding information on the internet that says maybe I should have questioned harder with the vaccines. Maybe I should have filed a petition when this happened, but it's too fucking late now because the doctors told me for years and years that it's not the vaccines that have done this. And this is the system that we work in. So once again, you can see how it might be accurate that only 1% of these vaccine injuries are actually being reported, because it has to be reported through your doctor. Your doctor has to say this was a vaccine injury. If your doctor doesn't say that, if your doctor doesn't support that, it's going nowhere, because you're not going to go looking into anything. You're not going to look into anything with vaccines if your doctor's already told you it's not that. And that's what's happening in the vast majority of cases, vast majority of cases. So going down a little bit further here, I'm skipping over a lot of stuff here. I wanted to point out this real quick. I made some notes here on the side in this pie chart. This is talking about the amount of time it takes to adjudicate a vaccine compensation injury. And remember, this is from 2014. I'll guarantee you these numbers would be skewed higher. 11% of claims, 11% of claims were still pending from 1999 to 2014. When this paper was written, there were 11% of cases that were still pending from 1999 to 2014. So 15 years sitting in limbo with nothing happening to them. Another 51% were taking more than 5 years to be adjudicated. So between, what is that, 62%, between 62% of cases were taking between 5 and 15 years for adjudication. This is government efficiency at its best. I wanted to show one more thing here. I think it's one more thing in here. So here we go. Here's another one of the issues here. Since fiscal year 1999, and I put a little arrow there, since 2014, 4 more vaccines have been added to the childhood schedule since 1999. Okay, so we now have, it says 6 were added in 1999. That's actually 10. 10 vaccines were added since 1999. So since fiscal year 1999, 10 vaccines have been added to the vaccine injury table. Here's the kicker, but has not added covered injuries associated with these vaccines to the table. 10 new vaccines have been added to the program, but there have been no added covered injuries from these vaccines added to the vaccine compensation injury program. This means that while individuals may file a claim for those vaccines, each petitioner must demonstrate that the vaccine that was administered caused alleged injury. In other words, it is up to you to figure it out. It's up to you to say that it caused this, okay? Because there's nothing that's been done to update the system to show that it could have been a reaction. Guillain-Barré, okay? Guillain-Barré is a very common side effect and from a bunch of different vaccines, but most of that's from vaccines added after 1999. So if you say Guillain-Barré, well, maybe not, because it's not in the program. So how are you going to prove it? This is, once again, one of these other problems with that. There is one more thing here. Here it is. The addition of the 6 vaccines, once again, 10 vaccines to the injury table without associated injuries has contributed to an increase in off-table claims. To receive compensation, the petitioners in these claims would not have the presumption of causation, meaning they have to prove causation. Once again, this is on the petitioner to prove causation. It frustrates me to read these things. There is one more thing here. There was something I was looking for that I highlighted. No, that wasn't it. Here it is, right here. Whoa, hello. Without awareness of the program, individuals who might otherwise receive compensation for a vaccine-related injury or death could be denied compensation because of a failure to file their claim within the statutory deadlines. One stakeholder commented that the public is largely unaware of the program, and this lack of awareness contributes to missing filing deadlines and individuals being denied the opportunity for compensation. This stuff pisses me off so much. It makes me so angry. That's what I'm talking about. So the vast majority of people do not know of this program. So therefore, how could they even file a claim? You've got 3 years to file a claim. You've got 2 years to file a claim. How would you even file a claim if you know nothing about this? How would you file a claim if the medical doctor's already told you that there's no way it could be the vaccines, right? So everything is stacked against the person who got injured. And so when that report says 1% is all that's getting reported, makes total sense to me. Total sense to me. And it probably is 100% accurate, which means that $5 billion mark should be astronomically higher. When we say how many people have died from vaccines, astronomically higher, because we're getting that number from the VAERS system. And that's only 1% of what's being reported. Now, why am I focusing on this? Is this about liability? I thought you were talking about liability. Yes, I'm talking about liability. You're giving these companies carte blanche. You, maybe not you, but yes, you. This is the reason I'm saying you, because we all have to be a part of the solution. We all have to be a voice that says, this ain't right. This is not right. Giving a company no liability for a product that they're making, one that's being injected into our children and into us, okay, is asinine. It's completely asinine, and it's dangerous. And I think I've shown that already. Now, I did mention COVID earlier, and I said that I would talk about COVID a little bit. So let me just briefly put that in there. Now, excuse me. COVID was created under emergency use authorization, EUA, emergency use authorization. And the problem with emergency use authorization is, number one, you couldn't have EUA enacted unless there were no other alternatives, meaning there couldn't be any other cheaper, effective way of treating the problem. So it gave incentive to the government and the pharmaceutical companies, which of course controlled the media, to say that hydroxychloroquine and all the other, I'm totally forgetting the other products, but all the other products that were bad-mouthed during COVID, because if we let them sit, if we don't attack them, then we can't have the EUA, because the body that does that would say, well, wait a minute, we have this product right here. We have this product right here that would work effectively. Doctors are already using it, and they're giving it good credit. We don't need the vaccines to be emergency use authorized. So instead, they attacked those, they belittled those, they insulted those, they created research to show that it was bad. If you look at the research papers prior to COVID, hydroxychloroquine, prior to COVID, hydroxychloroquine was considered like one of the safest things on the market. Not only hydroxychloroquine, but man, what am I thinking of? I'm thinking of I'm drawing a blank. Why am I drawing a blank on that? Hydroxychloroquine was the big one, but that was not the biggest one. What was the biggest one? What was the biggest one? Ivermectin. Yes, I just was listening to Joe Rogan earlier today, and he was talking about ivermectin again. Ivermectin. That was the other big one. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and there were other things too. There were blood transfusions or whatever that was. Anyway, regardless, the EUA would not get approved if these things worked. So there's no way they could let them work. They had to badmouth these things, because if they didn't, they would never get their emergency use authorization. And it was through the emergency use authorization that allowed the COVID vaccines to be created in this accelerated fashion. Never in the history of vaccines was a vaccine created that quickly with that little research, and it was done using mRNA technology, which prior to the COVID vaccines had never seen a success, ever. Coincidence, right? I've got emergency use authorization, which gives me blanket protection against liability. And we have to downgrade or denigrate all these other products to get that. And we did that. You saw that like crazy all over the TV. And I'm going to accelerate this. Within like 6 months, we're going to create a vaccine. Yes, it was tested, whatever. And it's never been successful before in the history of research. We've never had an mRNA vaccine actually show results or work. But of course, this one does. Absolute insanity. Okay, so the EUA gives COVID its protection, even though at this point it should be lifted because the EUA situation is over. They have not lifted it yet. It's still creating protection for COVID. So COVID's protected under EUA. All the other ones are protected under the National Vaccine Act to give the companies blanket protection. What would happen if we take that away? Well, the fear mongers would say the entire vaccine program would go away. I don't think that would happen. What it would do is it would force the manufacturers to create a better product. Now, what if it turns out that if it forced them to do that, they then actually said, we can't create a better product. Everything we create is going to be, dangerous. It's going to create all these problems. I want to share with you something else here. Well, I would share it to you if I could find it. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. This was a legal paper. There we go. This is a legal paper. I'm not sure if I would even be in my benefit to try and pronounce that first name there. Brucewitz. Looks like Brucewitz. Brucewitz versus Wyeth. Wyeth is a pharmaceutical company. And this was a U.S. Supreme Court document here. And I'm not going to read through this document, but let me just say that Congress did read through this document. And it was through the information in this document that Congress then made a statement. So it has been misquoted to say that the Supreme Court said this. Let me be real clear. The Supreme Court did not say what I'm about to say. Congress said it in response to this paper from the Supreme Court. In other words, the congressman read this thing and then they made this statement. So the Supreme Court did not say this, Congress did. What did they say? Well, they said that vaccines are, as a whole, are unavoidably unsafe. Vaccines are unavoidably unsafe. Congress said this. The same Congress that wants to uphold all this stuff to protect vaccines, the same Congress that wanted to try to beat up on Kennedy for questioning vaccines, not for even doing anything illegal or anything else, just questioning vaccines. It was Congress that actually made the comment back in 2011, I think it was, when they actually read that paper, that vaccines were unavoidably unsafe. Okay. Now, once again, remember, we are now talking about a product with zero liability for the manufacturer that is being quoted from Congress that it is unavoidably unsafe. It's unavoidably unsafe, but the manufacturers don't have to be responsible for it. will be responsible for it, and we'll do it in a crappy ass way with a reporting system that doesn't work, and with a system that keeps people sitting in limbo, and with payments. The max payment for death of your child is $250,000. The max payment if the vaccine kills your child is $250,000. Excellent work with the government. Okay. So we've got products that are declared unavoidably unsafe from companies with a track record of lying out their asses about the products, with track records of being sued for billions of dollars collectively, billions and billions of dollars collectively, and repeat offenses. Most of these companies repeat these offenses over and over and over again. They get sued, whatever. Okay. They're making so much money, whatever. Okay. Yet we still give them this liability protection. So what do I think would happen if it gets taken away? Well, number one, it needs to be taken away. Okay. Because you're not going to have any kind of, there's no motivation for these companies to produce the best product possible without the liability. There's no motivation whatsoever. Yeah, but the motivation is to protect our kids. No, it's not. Wake up. It's not. Okay. And so to say that is just really living in fantasy land. These products have no liability, and they're not going to have the same type of motivation to create a better product. It's just not going to happen. So we have to remove that to create that motivation. That's what we have to do. Will it damage the vaccine program? You know, yes. Let me just give a one-word answer at the beginning here. Yes, it's going to damage the program. Is that a bad thing, though, is the real question. I'm going to say no on that, because the program as it is, the program as it stands, has too many problems. There are too many problems the way the program stands. And so we need to remove the liability protection. We need to motivate these companies to produce the best possible product, period, bar none, and hold them responsible for it. Not the government, hold them responsible for it. And we need that to happen, because otherwise we're not going to get the best results. We're going to get lies. We're going to get subterfuge, deception. We're going to get products that are potentially lethal and are lethal, and it's never going to change. And that's only going to change through ability back where it belongs, and that is on these manufacturers. If you don't put the liability back on these companies, I don't see any of that changing whatsoever. I mean, trust is a funny thing. You hear that all the time, but it's not really. It's pretty straightforward. If you do trustworthy actions, it creates trust. If you are a trustworthy person, you get trust. If you're not a trustworthy person, you don't get trust. It's real simple. And when you look at all the legal actions, the lying, the cheating, the bribes, the deaths, how are we such a trust? We shouldn't be trusting. Okay. It is obscene. It's really obscene. It really is. So, this has to change. And I hope that this is something that Kennedy is going to really go after and change. I don't know when that'll happen. He's got so many things. Oh my God, folks, really, for all those who are listening who might be anxious about the order of operations that he is working in, trust his heart, trust his motivations. He's done nothing but prove his motivations for decades now. To me, at least, he's proved it over and over again. And so trust that he is on a path that's going to get us to the place where we need to be, but he's got to do it in a particular order. He's got to do it one step at a time, and he'll get there. So hopefully the liability thing will happen. It'll happen soon. I think one of the things that has to happen before that, probably, he is currently changing the rules, the guidelines for NIH for research development, for research enactment. He's changing those guidelines, and he's taking away incentives for research that would show why anti-vaxxers are hesitant. Get rid of all that. Okay. We need research, good, gold standard, solid, non-biased research to show the realities of the vaccine program. And I think that is going to be what he needs to have happen before he can go after the pharmaceutical giants. He needs to have better ammunition. Right now, he's dealing with a situation where, even though a lot of these research papers may be falsified, they may not be good research papers, he's dealing with research that shows the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. He has to show the real research. And I think that's what has to happen first. So, all right. Starting to run out of breath here. So I'm going to start winding things down here. I hope you could see what I was talking about there with vaccine liability and the problem with that, and with the corruption of these companies, and with the problem with the vaccination reporting system, et cetera. We have a lot of stuff going on that's not being looked at properly, and that's got to change. And once again, hopefully in the next few years, we're going to see that change. It's going to be a slow process, but we're going to see it. Until then, like I said, some of this has to go back to you. Okay. Tennis, I'm knocking the ball back over the court to you. Some of this has to go back to the individual, because we all have to hold some responsibility for talking to our congressman, right? Do you write letters to your congressman, or send emails is what would be the appropriate thing now? Do you spread the word? Do you share this information with your family and friends? If there's a protest at the state capitol, do you attend? These are the things that you've got to get involved with. It takes involvement. This is something that used to be a very Democrat thing, pro-Democrat. It's the Democrats that did all the protesting, which that was me, and I did the protesting. Okay. But it's not a Democrat thing. It's an American thing. It is, if you have concern about these things, if you want to see change enacted, our representatives have to see your passion about it. They have to see that you've done some of your own research, that you have knowledge about this stuff, and that you're concerned about it. And as I've stated before, and I'll state it over and over again, for those of you who have never had kids and are not going to, or you've had kids and they're fully grown and it's beyond your control with vaccinations at this point, you may think, well, it's not really my issue. I'm beyond that. It's not something I'm concerned with because it's not my issue. Understand a couple of things. Number one, it's still happening to other people's children. And if you care about children, you got to care about this situation, and it has to change. Something has to change. You can argue that the vaccines are protecting kids, but I can also argue that the vaccines are not protecting them, and it's actually harming them. And what we want is for it to be a solid program. If it's going to be a program, let's make it really solid. Let's make it live up to the words that the pro-vaxxers like to say exist already, which I can tell you don't. And that part should concern everybody, the health of our kids. If that doesn't motivate you, and that's okay, maybe it doesn't. If that doesn't motivate you, let COVID and the whole pandemic thing give you pre-warning to the fact that you are not immune to this. At any moment, our government can say, bird flu, it's now in every human, and everybody has to get this experimental RNA, DNA mix hybrid experimental vaccine injected into them, or you'll lose your job. You'll lose your passport. You'll lose your driver's license. Your kids won't go to school. That can happen. It's happened in the past. It's happened in other countries. It's come close to happening here all over the place. We missed it by so much. Okay. It hit us, but I mean, we missed a lot of that. don't fool yourself that this can't happen to you. So don't think you're immune to this vaccine issue. It affects all of us. And so get concerned, get educated, make yourself heard. All right. All right. That's episode 12. That's a dozen episodes. Yeah. All right. I hope you're enjoying all this. Please, 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 please share the word out there. Send the clips when you see them on Facebook or Twitter, send them out and retweet them, re-X them, whatever. Send the Facebook clips to your friends, your family, send it out there, get the word out there, spread the message. If you're not following, follow along on one or more of the accounts that I put these out there with, and help me grow this. Until then, I'll see you on the flip side. Bye-bye.